Okay, thank you very much. And the first thing I'm going to say is that it's about 11:30. It's after 11:30 at night, and I generally turn into a pumpkin about 9 o'clock. So if I'm not coherent enough, please make sure you ask questions. This today and the next 2 weeks, we are doing a 3-part kind of series on what we buy and why. And we buy, I'm going to try and I've got something going off on me. The other thing I would tell you is that internet is generally good, but it hiccups, and I'm not sure if that's because of my computer or and its compatibility with stuff over there. But please, if something happens, I'm going to let James kind of take over and stuff like that. So what we buy and why, and we're going to do this over the next 3 weeks. So we're really going to focus on the last 3. We buy small income, we still buy small income producing properties. So single families that we can get cheap or take control of, duplexes, triplexes, quads, small multifamilies. So we still buy single family houses in about 3 different markets, mainly because they still, people will need and want places to live. Apartment buildings, manufactured housing, and self-storage. And we're going to talk about apartment buildings tonight and manufactured housing next week and self-storage the following week. All right. So why apartments? Basically, it comes down to the fact that even with a lot of foreclosures, interest rates, and home values that are starting to decrease a little bit, people still need a place to live. It's already obvious that the number of foreclosures are starting to go up, and I don't see that it's not going to continue for a while. In a lot of markets, the decreasing home values has sort of plateaued, but the fundamentals is that people need a place to live, and apartments are kind of the desired, is what is most known and desired by a lot of people. Okay. So what I want to talk about just a little bit is a lot of people, when you're getting started, it makes sense to start buying small properties near you, or even, duplexes, triplexes, things like that. If you're coming in without a lot of money to get started with, then the smaller units tend to be a place where you can get in. And it's the good thing about apartment buildings and multifamily is that you can build upon the smaller units to get larger units, etc. It takes time to get to where you have enough units to really be able to start having some economies of scale. And so a lot of times I do think that it's easier to start with small properties. Number one, they're easier to find. They're easier to get funding for. For a lot of people, they're less intimidating. One of the things I think that there is a niche that any of you out there that have good rehab skills is to find a couple of smaller properties and reposition or rehab them. I don't know where a lot of you are, but in a lot of the places that I've lived in the past, there's some of these big old homes that used to be mansions, or used to have, their 3 floors. Those are really pretty nice candidates for getting not at terrible expenses and turning them into apartment buildings or small apartments, so that you can tend to buy them like you might be doing a single family house, even with hard money, and then rehab them and then finance yourself out of them. The downside to small properties is sometimes it's harder to find property managers. They tend to want larger properties, but it's really important that you do find managers that are dealing with the smaller units. What you really don't want is to find a property management company that's managing, 2,000 or 3,000 units, and you're coming in with your fourplex. Just the issue is that people tend to put efforts or tend to put focus on the larger portfolios. And so I do think it's easier and probably better if you can find somebody who manages a lot of small properties that like what you're doing or wanting to do. And if you have investors, it's harder to get both them and you a good return on your money, mainly because they just don't put off as much income after all the bills are paid. And so you have to kind of look carefully at some of those deals to make sure that both you and your investor are going to get a reasonable return on their money. Okay. So here are some others, kind of why apartments. Apartments are easy to understand. It is for both banks and for lenders, private money. Everybody has a pretty clear idea about what apartments are and how that business works. In terms of cash flow, the truth is an apartment tends to cash flow better per unit than does mobile home parks or self-storage, and generally not quite as well as single family. But in terms of the number of roofs or the number of doors under one roof, so to speak, apartment buildings tend to be get you better cash flow. They are easier to get financed. And again, that harkens back to the fact that they're easily understood. And most banks or lenders that do much lending have one or more apartment building in their portfolio. It's fairly easy to find good property managers with these. And if you can find properties that are C class, those are the ones that are more blue collar worker kinds of things. They are always in need. And so what do those tend to look like? They tend to be older buildings. They tend to have been built in the 60s, 70s, 80s kind of thing, can be well kept. They tend to have, this is kind of a generalization and not always true for sure, but they tend to have bigger rooms. And so there's often a little more square foot. The other thing to know is that a lot of the blue collar properties are families are going to be living there. And so instead of having like a lot of one bedrooms that you would in a 1 or 2 bedrooms that you would have in a newer apartment building, you're looking for 2s and 3 bedroom apartments, and they're a little bit harder to find, but they are really pretty easy to get rented, and they tend to stay rented. Okay. And that comes back to the fact that a lot of them are families with children needing a place to live. Okay. What are the downside to apartments? In general, they have higher expenses than the other two. Just in terms of upkeep and stuff that if I was to, of the three apartment buildings, mobile home parks and self-storage, apartments tend to run, and this is not including a vacancy factor, so these are just flat out expenses. They tend to be 45 to 50%, where mobile home parks tend to be 40 to 45%, with some caveats, and we'll talk about those caveats next week. And self-storage tends to be 30 to 35%. But remember, again, the upside is of these is that it's better cash flow. So even though the expenses are less in mobile home parks and apartment and self-storage, your cash flow is going to be higher with apartments in general. Expenses are higher, but cash flow is higher. In self-storage and mobile home parks, the expenses aren't quite as much, but because they don't rent for as much, your cash flow isn't quite as good. The other downside is that there's more competition because everybody kind of understands apartments. There's a lot of people looking to buy them. And if you want to sell, typically, they're more expensive to sell because brokers and others are going to have more, they're going to take more, you have to do a little more to get things fixed up. And so it's going to take more off your bottom line. Okay, so what do we look for in apartment buildings? I'm going to say we look for emerging markets, but that's with a caveat. If you are tending to be a buy and hold, and you're going to hold these properties for a long time, then emerging markets aren't quite as important. So emerging markets, I don't know if a lot of you remember when we did the class on phases of the market, but phase 2 is where you have a big increase in the value of properties, and so the costs are going up, et cetera, et cetera. Phase 1 is where you tend to see prices going up, and you see things selling fast. Phase 2 is where we have flipped over and things are prices are starting to go down. You're seeing things on the market longer. And so emerging markets tend to be phase 1 and the latter part of phase 4 of the market cycle. Most of the country right now is in phase 2. So it's gone over the top, and days on market are longer, prices are coming down to a more reasonable thing, to meet more reasonable prices. And so coming back again, emerging markets are when you still have prices going up. I don't know, there's probably some markets in the country that are in the earlier stages of phase 1 of the market cycle, but I don't think there's a lot. And so right now, I wouldn't be putting a lot of emphasis on emerging markets. Okay, so we also look for properties where they're selling, the asking price is below the current price per door. So in general, if you were to look across the country right now, you would find that a lot of apartments are selling per apartment door somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000 and $80,000. And for that to work, you have to have a good rent to be able to afford the mortgage on that. So if you have properties that have some things that need to be fixed, or that you have an unstable property and it is selling for 30, 20,000 a door, 25, 30, 30,000 a door, then that is what we would consider selling below what the current price per door is. Those are a little bit harder to find, probably not going to be quite so bad in the right now and in the coming months, because there's a lot of properties that are going to be going up for refi. And a lot of people paid too much. And so the initial asking price for a lot of these is going to be way up when they try and sell them to get out. But if you sit on it, I think the prices are going to be coming down. You look for low rents where you have some ability to increase the rents. One of the things we talked about several times is that you can't raise the rent. So if you rents are $100 below market, if you don't want to lose all of your residents, you probably can't raise the rents $100 at one time, because a lot of people just aren't going to be able to afford it. And so you're going to have to spread that out over a couple of 3 years, right? But the point still is that if the rents in a house in a property that you're buying is below what the average is in that market or in that neighborhood, then there is some upside for you. And so whether you capture it in 1 year or 3, you still have that equity gain. Another thing we look for is a high vacancy. And we look for that in a lot of reasons, because a lot of lenders will not lend on a property that has a lot of vacancy. And here, when we're talking vacancy, we're talking both physical vacancy, you have a vacant unit, and an economic vacancy, which means that you have bad debt, people aren't paying, or you have units that are down and need to be rehabbed before you can rent them again. So you put those two together to get your overall vacancy. And anything below 80, 85%, it's going to be very hard to find lenders to lend on that unless you find one that's going to charge very high interest rates. The other thing we look for are properties that have a lot of value add opportunities. And a couple examples I can think of. Say you have basement in a couple of apartments, but they are not really set up so that it would be easy to put apartments there. So they don't have windows out, they don't have a lot of exits, they don't have a lot of other things that make them candidates for occupancy for apartments, but they are good candidates to put in storage. So you put up chain link fence with chain link, not fences, but the chain link sides where you can put locks on them, put a laundry down in there. You can do several things. So you look for other value add things that you can do where you can add another stream of income. So I think those are, I think I have, okay, here's the other, yep, the last slide here I want to talk about today is other things we look for. We look for bad management, and that's going to generally show up with problems in collections, problems in deferred maintenance, problems with occupancy. You have to take that with a bit of a grain of salt, however, because as a property starts not doing so well, owners typically are not going to let management spend money on things that maybe they should. And so a lot of it is caused by the fact you don't have great managers, and it is exacerbated by the fact that when properties aren't doing well and you don't have extra cash flow, things don't get fixed. You look for high turnover. So if people are, now the average turnover in an apartment building tends to be, believe it or not, a year to 18 months to 2 years. So there's a lot of turnover. But if you start seeing turnover where people leaving before a year's up or at the year and it's significant, then remember, turnover is your single biggest controllable expense. So if you find something that there's a lot of turnover, there's probably a reason for it, and you're going to kind of want to find out why and see if it's something you can fix. High expenses. So if we said that in apartments, your normal expenses, not including a vacancy, is 45 to 50%, then if you have expenses that are at 70%, I know that there's things I can go in and I can trim those expenses right away, which is going to help my bottom line. You looking for burned out landlords, for people who just don't want to do this anymore. You tend to find this more in the smaller properties where people are self-managing. There is a lot of people who don't like to manage or not good at managing. And probably burned out landlords is one of the biggest reasons you see turnover in small multifamily and single family houses, is that they just don't know how to manage. And so they haven't been making money. They can't control tenants. They don't have good processes to figure out who they let in. And the other thing is, if you have people who are not very experienced, shall we say, they don't separate out the expenses in such a way that you can actually see where the issues are. And so if you can separate out expenses, change how you're looking at those, that offers some ability to build back some of those things to know where you can control. And so any of this and this are good ways to be able to find apartments that we go looking for. And because remember, we said that in general, apartments don't make, they make more than the others, but none of them make a lot of money. And that prices are so high right now because of what's gone on in the past. So prices are starting to come down, but in my opinion, they're still too high in general, most of the time. Then if you have some areas that some of these things that we're looking for, they're going to offer you opportunities to increase your net operating income and therefore increase the value of the property. All right, I'm going down to the last slides. All right. Whoops. Sorry, guys. All right. So you've all seen this before. We've done several free webinars. If you want to know more about the class we offer, the online class of 36 modules, it's about 60 hours of material, then you can go to this Passive Wealth webinar and look at that, and that's going to give you some insight into what we do and how we do it. If you want to look to see our website, you can go to Passive Cash Flow for Life. And if you have questions, please go to support and email at passivecashflowforlife.com. We put up all of these Teaching Tuesdays on our YouTube channel, which you see there, the address for, and James generally has them up by Thursday or so. Every week we do a Teaching Tuesday at about 6:30 Eastern time. And so mark your calendars, please. And then you can also watch this if you can't make it on a Tuesday. Then you can come back in and watch it on our YouTube channel. And all of our Teaching Tuesdays are in a playlist there. So I hope that that helps out. And we're going to turn it over to questions. And James, do you have anything that you would want to add that I left out? And are there any questions there? James?
Sorry, do you want me to show the website?
I don't know. We don't have a lot of time here. So
Okay, that's fine.
you can just show them the website if you want to, but don't go through everything.
Okay, I'll wait till the end and do it then. Might be easier. So,
All right, you're just on mute again, James. James, you're on mute.
oops, sorry. Usually when I touch the space bar, it takes me off mute. So John is asking, or Gene is asking, most of multifamily I've seen advertised are $250,000 to $400,000 per door. Wow. I don't know where you're looking, Gene, but
yeah, it's mostly in the DMV area.
oh,
Yeah, that's why when you say, what is it, 30 to 80,000 a door, I'm like, where are you finding these?
Okay, so let's if we're sort of talking about this, that's probably brings up a good point. The cost per door is going to be a reflection of what the rents are. So
Okay.
if you're like in Washington, DC, where the rents are $2,000 or $3,000 for a 1-bedroom or an efficiency, then you're going to see the price of the per door higher. But that is not reflective of most of the country. So what has happened, though, although it's starting to break down, is that when the big cities like New York and Chicago and DC and all of these started selling properties at a 5 cap rate or a 4 cap rate, then everybody else in the country thought they ought to be able to do the same. And that has driven the cap rate down, which means things are more expensive. So I think that if you look across the country, the price per door is basically a reflection of the rents. And so you make a good point, is that some of the price per door is going to be way higher. But what you should be able to see there is that the rents that the are significantly higher than is average. I don't know that I have a good easy way to tell you, but if you're paying $200,000 a door and the rents are $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month, then basically half of that per door cost is going to expenses in a way. Then you have to subtract out your payment and still have something left for a cash flow. And that becomes something you start looking at. So maybe the better point I was trying to make is that in general, the price per door is too high across most of the country to be able to make a reasonable return on your money. But you have to look at that in relation to the cost per door. Gene, did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, it does. I mean, I typically, as a rule of thumb, I typically just look at, I break up multifamily into a single door. And if it doesn't meet the 1% rule, then chances are I'm not going to cash flow.
All right, you want to tell people what the 1% rule is? Put you on the spot here.
Yeah, sure. So 1%, Bigger Pockets talks about it. So basically that if you take the price per door of the property, so if you look at a single family, for example, that I buy in over in Maryland. So if a house, say, sells for 100,000, 1% of that is $1,000. So the house should rent for at least $1,000 for it to potentially cash flow. So the 1%.
All right, so if you're paying $250,000 a door,
Mhm. I should expect at least 2,500
Okay,
rents. So what I do is I used to do all the fancy spreadsheets. So all I do now is just break it down into what's the average price per door and then what's the average rent. And if they're not even close to 1%, then I don't even bother putting it in a spreadsheet because it's not going to cash flow.
all right, that's another good way to look at it. Thanks.
Yep.
Other questions?
Well, Seema wrote in here about buying C-class, that she knows many people that would never buy C-class as they will be hit hard in a recession like the 2020 shutdown.
Oh, well, I'm going to strongly disagree with that. So, those tend to be, we tend to buy B and C class properties, which are, the A class properties are the ones that have all the bells and whistles. C class properties are the blue collar, the working people. And they typically don't move very much. If you are a good landlord, they will tend to stay for years. They are, in terms of the recent COVID, where there was a moratorium on evictions, it was not just the C class and B class properties that were hit. It was a lot of A class properties too, because a lot of those people lost their income. And A class properties in general just don't cash flow all that well because they cost so much to maintain. Expenses are higher. So what was the rest of the question again, James? I'm sorry, I'm turning into a pumpkin here.
I think you got it. Just I guess the theory was that they got hit so hard in the recession like the 2020 shutdown.
Well, they did, a lot of them did, and a lot of them, and during COVID, because of the COVID relief funds, a lot of them continued to get money. And we actually helped a lot of people fill out those forms so that they could get money. So the issue with a lot of those blue collar properties right now is that rents have gone up so much in a lot of these, that a lot of people in that sector can't afford the rent anymore because they just don't make enough money. So, so that does become a bit of an issue in terms of people being able to afford the income increases in rents. But we've also kept in a lot of our properties, we haven't raised the rents to where they could be in a lot of properties because affordable housing is such a problem in this country right now. And if you do evict people, you're going to find it's harder and harder to find people who qualify for your units because they just don't make enough money for those units. And so it's a bit of a balancing act as to what you want to do. So I see more issues actually because of inflation, and rents are not keeping up with inflation. I'm sorry, wages are not keeping up with inflation. So it becomes more of an issue. Certainly expenses have gone up over the past year and a half. That you have to, you're paying higher expenses. All right, other questions?
Seema's also asking, does $200 per door profit make sense?
Yeah, that's initially in an apartment building. You should, going in first year, you should be looking at kind of $100 per door per unit because you've got a lot of expenses. And then every year after that, as rents go up a little bit and you start getting control of some of those things, your cash flow goes up per unit, per door. So single family houses are closer to 200. Now, any of you who live in and around Baltimore, you've got a skewed view of what the rest of the world does, because at least until recently, the cost of a house in Baltimore City or the closer in part of the county has been relatively cheap in relation to what you can charge for rents, but that is not true in most of the country. It just isn't. So go ahead.
Okay, no, I was just wondering if I can ask, since this is the first time I'm on this meeting. I'm not sure, where do you buy? Where do you as a group buy your properties?
We have properties in 11 states. So,
Okay.
In several states, the Pacific Northwest, the West, and then kind of in and around the Mid-Atlantic area.
So do you avoid the really big cities? Because
I
they tend
do.
to. Okay.
do.
Well, that's what I've heard. Like, I have a daughter in New York City, I have a daughter in Arlington, and I'm in Florida, and the rents are just, the kind of rents they charge, I don't know how anybody blue collar can afford them. So, okay.
No, I don't think most of them can. The other thing is that there's more and more jurisdictions that are putting in rent controls, frankly, and you need to kind of look when you do diligence to see if they're doing that. But I tend to buy in small secondary markets and tertiary markets, and that's worked well over the years for me. Other questions? From Sharon? Okay. Oh, Sharon was just saying hi to Seema.
Is it hard to manage a property yourself?
I would say yes, but that's not my long suit. I'm good at managing managers, right? But a lot of people, there's a lot to be said for managing some yourself to begin with when you're getting started, to kind of know what it's about. When I started buying, I had a full-time job with the government, and there's just no way I could have bought and managed them myself. Plus, I was buying across the country, and so it wasn't feasible. So my general comment would be that if your goal is to have enough units by the time you retire or whatever to replace your salary, then self-management may be a way to go. So if you want to have 20 units by the end of your retirement, but if you want to have a lot of units by the end of your retirement, you shouldn't even consider managing them yourself, in my opinion, because it's just, that's where a lot of the time comes in. And you need somebody who's really good at managing. The reason a lot of landlords, burned out landlords, is because they try and manage and they really don't know how to manage. All right, other questions?
There's another one in here asking what's better, market rent or government programs?
Either or a mix. The benefit from a government program like HUD or HUD-VASH is that you have a guaranteed rent. You have to get on their lists, and you're going to be dealing with annual inspections. But if your plan is to keep your units up, it shouldn't be a big issue. And people on those programs are generally pretty good residents, because if they tear up a unit, if they have a lot of wild parties and stuff, and you get to the point where you're going to evict them, the HUD programs will typically kick them off their programs as well, and they don't want to lose those HUD vouchers. So they're not bad residents, but I wouldn't want to put all of my eggs in that basket, frankly. So I would do a mix. We have several of our buildings and apartments have some people who are on HUD or similar kinds of programs.
Those are all I see in the chat. Anybody else? I mean, we've got a small enough crowd. If you want to just unmute and ask something, whether it be about what we've talked about or anything else, please feel free to do so.
Other questions about anything, folks?
I guess I was gonna say, like, with COVID, have you found like different types of apartment buildings to be more desirable, like maybe like townhome type apartment buildings? It's just something I've thought.
I don't know. I've never really looked at that. So I honestly don't know. We were pretty lucky in that normally our collections are somewhere across our portfolio, somewhere between 95 and 98%. And we went down to 90 to 92% during the height of COVID. And so we didn't lose a lot. And we never really went to look at what kind of apartments or what kind of units were filled and what weren't. So I really don't know, Jane.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
Anybody else before Nichole turns into a pumpkin?
Do you see a lot of seller financing deals on multifamily or no?
Seller financing in apartments?
Yeah.
You may find them in the smaller, like duplexes, triplexes, things like that. You find seller financing quite often in manufactured housing, not so much in apartments. I've done several apartments, but it's been a few years ago that were master leases where the property was in a mess. And I walked in and took it over under a master lease and gave them a little bit. And then with an agreement that, at the end of a certain number of years, I'd buy them out. And so refinance them out. So master leases are more common. You may be able to get a form of owner financing. We've talked many times about the commercial properties tend to have a balloon, and so you may buy it for a certain price with a 25-year AM, but it's going to have a 5-year balloon, say, and that means that every 5 years you're going to have to go in all the way into underwriting again. And it's going to have to pass the underwriting criteria. So a lot of these units, a lot of these apartment buildings that were sold at such crazy cap rates are going to be coming up for refi. And so people were buying them at 5-6 cap rates at 4.5 or 5% interest a lot of times. And they're going to come into the refi and they're still going to have the 25-year AM, but now they're looking at an 8.5, 9.5% interest. And they are going to find that a lot of the lenders are going to say, sure, we'll refi. You just need to bring in X number of dollars to make sure that this is going to work with the new DCR. And I think there's going to be opportunity if you're sitting on some cash or you have some investors for you guys to step in and to put up that money that the bank's looking for and to take some equity, to take some ownership. And whatever you can negotiate, so you might negotiate in 5 years or 10 years that you're able to buy them out. But even if you don't, if you can walk into 20-25% equity, that's not a bad deal, as long as you have some ability to in the operating agreement to not have to have some say in how things are run, so to speak. That answer that?
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions?
I had a question is actually, Jane and I and James were speaking earlier, and I thought might bring it up for the good of the group. And it also kind of goes hand in hand with the financing, the bank financing, with what you look for, what the banks look for when financing apartment complexes with number of bedroom, bathrooms, how many of each are, like, if a third of them is studios and maybe a third is one, and do they take that into consideration? The numbers
Yeah,
of
they
bedroom,
do
bathrooms?
to a certain extent. That's actually a good question. A couple of things is that there tends to be a bias towards 1 and 2 bedrooms. With efficiencies, if you have the majority of them, they're efficiencies, you're going to need to be able to show that they've been rented for a lot of time. And so, but the other thing is that anything that's 600 square feet or less, you're going to, at least it used to. A lot of the apartments that are being built now are very small. So, I'm not sure I'm up to date on this, but in general, 500 or 600 square feet or less, you're going to find a hard time getting them financed, because people are just going to view that as too small. Now, if that's an efficiency, that's not going to be the case, but a 1 bedroom, that's pretty small. That's pretty small. That answer that?
Perfectly. Thank you so much.
Okay, do you have other input, Sharon? Because I know you guys look at this stuff a lot. So what are you finding?
That's funny. We were talking with James earlier about like locations too, where, where you're looking into the location with pool of whatever, markets like jobs, industries, colleges in the area to bring a pool of people into the apartments.
And we're starting to see some price drops too, and people maybe not dropping them right now, but just kind of talking about, oh crap, my stuff's coming up, I got to refinance, things aren't going well. So I do think there's going to be a tsunami of properties both in residential and multifamily here soon.
Yeah, I do too. And I think it's just kind of keeping your fingers on the pulse. And if you have good relationships with any small banks where the commercial broker or the vice president or something like that, you can just give them a call and sort of say, look, we're interested in any of these. If you have any people that are in trouble, you're welcome to send them our way, and we'll see if we can work something out. So, we have a little extra cash that we could put into something, those kinds of things. Now, some of them will and some won't, but it doesn't hurt to get on their radar screen. So I think come in the next 3 months, you're going to start seeing a whole lot of this. It's going to come up. I think it's going to get worse. Starting in the fall for the next couple of years, I think you're going to see just a lot of things available, and you just have to figure out how you're going to get on people's radar screen.
I have a quick question. What are your thoughts on buying a multifamily home near a university and renting them out to students?
I think that's not a bad idea. So a couple of caveats about that stuff in general. So just broader in general is that those tend to be rented by a room as opposed to the apartment. And so if you have a 2-bedroom apartment, you can have two people in. The things based on general students, I would say that you need to have parents co-sign always. You need to have it start in June and go through May, because if it starts in September, you want it rented for a year and they're out in June. And so you can play heck trying to get things paid in July and August. You want to have it include housekeeping, because all of us have a sense about what students, what a lot of students do in terms of housekeeping and keeping things up.
Okay.
But there's a lot of different kinds of shared rentals that you can be talking about other than student housing. So you can be talking about so in a couple of our mobile home parks, we have a couple, 3 of the homes on our properties built out, so they're rented, and that you'll have people who are working on roads or who are doing construction in an area need housing for a year or something, and you can do something like that with them. You have you can have things for nursing, that you rent out rooms. You can have people who have, who are, what am I trying to say? Who have mental issues, kinds of things, as long as they come with somebody who is kind of oversight them. So there's a whole lot of different areas you can look at in those kinds of things. You could have rooming house kinds of things where you're renting a room and then collecting, every week or every 2 weeks. But that you really need to have somebody who's on top of things, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Probably time for one more question, and then I am going to hang up here and turn it over to Sharon and Jane, and I'm going to leave, even though I wanted to hear what people are saying, what people are going to say, what Erica's going to have to say. Hi, Erica. But I am really, it's 12:30 here, and I'm beyond being a pumpkin. I'm an early morning person. I'm a late night person. So one more question, or I'm just going to turn it over to Sharon and Jane. Okay, thanks, everybody. Thank you, Jean. I'm going to sign off. And I'm going to look forward to hearing what Jane and Sharon and Erica have to say. Bye, everybody.